Welcome to the MUFG Global Markets Asia podcast. I'm Michael Wan, Senior Currency Analyst with the MUFG Global Markets Asia Research Team. Today is 28 May 2024. The following podcast is for informational purposes only. It is intended for professional investors and eligible counterparties and not for retail clients. Any content should not be regarded as an offer to conduct investment businesses or investment recommendations. So, in today's episode, I'm going to talk about three things in India. First, I'll touch on the general elections that is happening right now and how we should think about the possible scenarios and the resultant market impact. Second, I'll talk about the larger than expected dividend announcement by the Reserve Bank of India to the government and the impact to macro and markets. Last but not least, I'll provide a preview of RBI's upcoming monetary policy meeting on 7 June and the key announcements that we should watch out for. So first off, let me touch on the 2024 general elections. As many of you would know, India has been holding its general elections in phases since 19th of April. Many have termed this as the world's largest elections. And that's certainly the case, with close to 1 billion eligible voters, more than 600 million people likely voting at the end of the day, and for a total of 543 seats in the Lok Sabha, or the lower house of parliament. We've already gone through 6 phases as we speak, with only one phase of the elections left on the 1st of June. In terms of key timings to watch out for, the first exit polls will come out after the last votes are cast from 1st June, 6 p.m. Indian Standard Time. And this exit polls will give an initial indication of the election results, but which we note may not always be accurate based on historical experience. Meanwhile, the official results will come out on the 4th of June. And certainly, markets could be primed for some volatility, both in the lead up to these key dates around the elections, and certainly after the elections, depending on what comes up. And from a market's perspective, in our view, we think that as long as the current incumbent government wins a majority in parliament, in other words, 272 seats or more, we think markets should take the results positively over time. And this is because we think that there will be policy continuity in key areas such as infrastructure, investment attraction, fiscal consolidation, and inflation management, while also raising the possibility of more difficult structural reforms passing, assuming a strong mandate for the incumbent. Of course, there are many shades of grey in terms of the actual results, and we acknowledge that there could be some small knee-jerk weakness in the currency and risk assets if the BJP loses some seats but still maintains a majority in parliament. But ultimately, we do think that from a fundamental perspective, the currency should still regain its footing soon after, given policy continuity, given positive trends and the fundamentals, as long as the current government maintains a majority. Looking on the other side of the coin, we think the biggest outsized market reaction will likely come if a weak coalition government comes into power and if there's a change in the government. And this is because there will likely be a relook of past policies, a slowdown in fiscal consolidation, together with a possible tilt away from supply-side reforms to policies to support consumption, demand, and the lower income. In these scenarios, we think the Indian rupee could weaken, perhaps by around 1 to 3% based on historical experience. Bond yields will likely grind higher, while risk assets, including equities, could fall quite sharply depending on the results. And from a macro perspective, we do think that elections certainly do matter over the medium term. And that's why there's so much focus on the outcome of the elections because they could affect the pace of structural reforms in the economy. Nonetheless, we point out that for India, there are certainly many good things going for it, which are still independent of the government of the day. And these drivers include good demographics, a young population, rising middle class, coupled with global megatrends such as supply chain diversification and a surge in digitalization. That is not to say that policy shifts won't have an impact, but it's a good reminder that we should not swing too much in either direction in longer-term economic assessments. So, firstly, that's on the elections. Second, let me now talk a little bit about the larger than expected dividend payout by the Reserve Bank of India to the government. To recap, the RBI announced that it is providing a far larger than expected dividend to the government of around 2 trillion rupees for this upcoming fiscal year. This is a lot larger than what many analysts were penciling in, while the government itself in the interim budget was only assuming around 1 trillion of dividends, and this also includes contributions from state-owned banks. And so this development is pretty meaningful for markets, and the fundamental reason is that the incoming government will likely have an additional 0.2 to 0.4% of GDP of fiscal space, depending on the assumptions that you use. And as such, with this extra fiscal space, the government has various options, including using this extra space to accelerate fiscal consolidation, spending this extra space to boost growth, and/or a mix of both. And when looking at the market reaction, India's government bond market reacted quite meaningfully, with 10-year bond yields falling closer to 7.04% from 7.1% prior to the announcement. Meanwhile, there was quite a bit of positive spillovers to the equity markets as well, which also helped to support the Indian rupee indirectly, of course, among other factors, which includes the elections that's happening right now. In our view, taking a step back, while we agree with the positive sentiment in markets in the near term from the higher RBI dividend, we do think that this level of dividend is unlikely to be sustained in subsequent years. As such, the government will still have to do the heavy lifting from a fiscal consolidation perspective in other areas over time in order to see the credit rating improve. And it remains to be seen whether more difficult reforms such as raising revenues and/or lowering operating expenditure to meet the government's longer-term deficit goals can ultimately be achieved. But certainly in the very near term, it's still a positive from a market's perspective and from a bond yield perspective. And last but not least, let me provide a little bit of a preview of the upcoming RBI monetary policy meeting happening on 7 June. RBI's last monetary policy meeting decision in April was pretty much a decision which I think was expected by markets, with an unchanged repo rate of 6.5%, while keeping the policy rate stance of withdrawal of accommodation unchanged. Meanwhile, the voting patterns were also in line with expectations, with one member of the MPC or the Monetary Policy Committee dissenting. We think that this meeting in June will likely be along similar lines, with an unchanged policy rate for now, a commitment to keep running the race to achieve the RBI's 4% inflation target, while also giving a nod to the progress on core inflation thus far. However, we think that there could be some important announcements by the RBI on how the central bank will deal with the inflows expected from bond index inclusion from June 2024. There have been some news reports that the RBI may consider tweaking its liquidity framework to manage the large inflows, while also using a suite of existing and possibly new tools to manage and mop up excess domestic liquidity. So this is certainly something to watch out for in the monetary policy meeting by the RBI. In addition to these possible announcements, we think that the press conference this time round will likely focus quite a bit on the mechanics of RBI's dividend and how the larger number was arrived at. So thank you for listening to the MUFG Global Markets Asia podcast. Rate, review, and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you subscribe to your podcasts. Contact your MUFG sales representative for more information, and check back again for more insights from the Global Markets Research team.